The Ayman. Still such a joker.
Hmm.
He manages to send me great messages through various people, anyone he can get to listen to.
Oh, that's
I'm
awesome.
always getting messages from friends. I was in meditation and Ayman popped in and he said to tell you this.
That's funny. What kind of messages do you get?
That he's loving being out of the body and
Hmm.
just the freedom, and he's so glad, not to have the pain anymore that was associated with that body because it was done. And really enjoying the freedom. And he was he's just so creative and so free, and he can just like go through all these worlds, and yeah, he's really, really loving that. And that he's really proud of what I'm doing with everything and really amazed by it. And that he is with Aslan every night, loving him, which I really feel because Aslan's very solid in his energy.
Good. Wow.
Yeah,
That is incredible. That's really, it feels like what this conversation is really about when you get to the higher levels of how much that world is so much a part of this world, even though it can be so difficult when we're in the density of physical embodiment to be aware of
yeah,
it.
yeah. And it's really our own blockages that separate us from it. It's our own fears and insecurities and angers and, resentments and whatever that separate us. And if that's not there, like Aslan doesn't, he's very open in that way. And so he's just there. He doesn't know what it is, but he does, he doesn't know not to let it in.
And you would feel he would feel the lack of it, the lack of Iman's presence. But because he feels Iman's presence, there's a sense of just safety and
Yeah.
stability. Wow, that's
Yeah.
special.
Yeah.
Well, you are joining us at the beginning of episode 5 of the Sacred Commerce podcast. I think I really want to keep that part in as the intro. And
Absolutely.
so, welcome. If you feel like you stumbled in on the middle of a conversation, you kind of did. But it's the beginning of a bigger conversation that we're bringing to you in this podcast, episode 5 of the Sacred Commerce podcast, exploring the principles of the book Sacred Commerce by Ayman Sawaf and Rowan Gabrielle. And of course, as usual, during this onset of the podcast, Rowan is leading us off, really guiding us through some of the principles and practical applications of this book. And I've been really enjoying it. Our interactions so far, Rowan. How about you?
It's so lovely to be just feeling into all of this in this way with you. So it's a real pleasure having kind of, you've been being the inspiration for us to go deeper at the point we met originally,
Yeah.
you know. And as I think Ayman and I always intended, we intended to kind of light this fire and let it grow and let it be built by the community. We felt like we had an essence to share
Mm-hmm.
that was really potent, but we didn't know what the form of that would end up looking like. Like a lot of people, ask us, well, how do you do sacred commerce? And it's your own spiritual work that
Yeah.
is the doing of it. So that path looks different for everybody, but also as everybody that feels that current is growing into it,
Mm-hmm.
different different like things are really brought to light, and the meme
Yeah.
is growing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and actually, since we sent out our last newsletter, sharing the podcast with our mailing list, and asking if anybody wanted to be on the podcast to share how they've lived into sacred commerce. We got a really great response, and there's a lot of people coming,
No, that's
that want
great.
to share how they've been working with it. So it's going to be really exciting to build out the concept with the community,
Yeah. Yeah.
because we definitely have never felt like it's we had it all.
Yeah.
We knew we
Yeah.
had something exciting that was an essence, and that it would grow over time. And I think it is kind of time for it to grow. So it feels exciting that we're doing this now.
Yeah.
For that to happen, for this to be a place where it's a bit of a this podcast to be a little bit of a central place where we can all meet and kind of
Yeah.
share.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to
So
that as much
yeah.
as I'm really enjoying the reconnection myself here in this. And it feels like a resurgence of something that's needed the gestative period of the last few years to bring, I know for myself, a lot more personal wisdom, a lot more embodiment. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the podcast.
Chills from head to foot. I couldn't agree more. In my own journey as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a maturity that's needed to go into the depths of these things, and
Hmm.
we're coming into our elder years now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Officially, right? I think about the openness has always been there, and yet there's always been this kind of clarity to where, there's that saying, be open-minded, but not so open-minded, your brain falls out, right? Uh, there's always been this, yes, bring who you are as a part of the merchant priesthood. But then there's also this kind of clear set of kind of they're pillars, they're principles, they're not these rules, but it's you're carving out a space in some specific ways that are oriented around emotional alchemy, as you define it in your program. But it's one set of tools among many that you've discussed in the past as being proper to the merchant priesthood. And I know we discussed we wanted to make that kind of the theme of today's conversation. And the ones that we've talked about, meditation, contemplation, some of the embodiment practices of yoga and qigong, gene keys, enneagram, tarot, divination expressions, and there's really like a lot of tools that a lot of people could already be working with that fall into what would be appropriate for as a tool set for the merchant priesthood. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, as a general prompt. And, we could start with the meditation and contemplation as we had really know
Good
that
place
it's
to
the
start.
beginning of it.
So meditation is really the key tool that not only we personally have used in our personal growth and personal development, but it's also a key tool of the merchant priesthood. And it's that ability to learn how to go inside to change the external reality versus trying to change the external reality. So you're always, taking the feedback of the external, but you're taking it really very personally, and you're taking responsibility for it. And that requires, that's why their training was so long, and it was kind of the PhD level of their education, because to get to that point where you can even be 100% responsible, not that you can ever be 100%, but like where you can be really responsible for your reality creation, takes a lot of self-honesty, and that self-honesty requires a lot of contemplation. We use meditation as that form. And what the kind of meditation that we use, there's really two kinds of meditation, right? There's sensory deprivation, which is more the Eastern, TM and all of that kind of Buddhist meditation, and then the sensory stimulation. And both of them take you to the same place. They take you into a focused state of mind, right? But there's these two ways of getting there. And the sensory stimulation, we've always felt, is a little bit more, in a way, almost appropriate to the West. We lead very stimulated lives, and so it's a little easier for us Westerners to pop in that way into that kind of altered state of reality.
Right.
And when we say sensory stimulation, meaning using your imagination, we call them shamanic meditations. So it's like you're on a shamanic journey, but it's all happening through your imagination in your mind. So you're personifying your higher self, you're personifying your emotions, you're creating alliances with them, you're letting them guide you.
Mm-hmm.
What would my anger have to say about this? What would he or she think about this decision? Well, right. Damn, he'd be pissed, or like that. He'd be like, no, wouldn't like it. Like, let them And then before the situation even happens, you're able to know what those inner responses are, you know.
Right.
And so meditation is really the key tool of the emotional alchemist, because you just get to know yourself really well, and you have a level of self-honesty that is that's pretty awesome.
Now, do you have a process of in your meditation before you get to the imagination where you're getting into a kind of non-ordinary state where your brainwaves are kind of able to make the imaginative experience more real in some way, or is it just
Yeah,
basically
absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
So I'll always count myself down from 5 to 1. So you're putting yourself basically in a light
got
hypnosis.
it.
And then I always, pretty much every single meditation, start by connecting with my higher self,
Mm-hmm.
because that energy is, you know, your protective energy. I start in my safe place. I have a
Yeah.
safe place in nature, which is my, you know, it's mine. I created it in my imagination, and it's there just for me to love me and nurture me. And it just puts you in that state. You know,
Yeah.
safety is the first gift of love, right? If you're loved,
Mm-hmm.
you feel safe.
Yeah.
And so it puts you in that state of being loved, and your higher self puts you in that state of being with you, you know. So you're not going to go and touch esoteric energies that, you know, there are esoteric energies that can burn us if we
Right.
go too close to them without protection. So it's always really a great idea to have your higher self with you. More like the archetypal energies.
Okay.
So the energies like that the tarot talk about,
Yeah.
those energies, you know, those cards are like depictions of a huge energy that is more real than we can
Right.
even imagine.
Right.
It's far more real than we are.
Right.
And we think we're very real,
Right.
but it's like real and vast.
It's informing.
And we can touch into it through these, you know, reflections that are cards. But those energies work with us, you know. That's why the tarot exists. But when we're working with those kind of energies, I think we can barely even comprehend the vastness of such an energy and the power of such an energy. And so if we don't go with our higher selves to work with those archetypes, you know, we can get burned. You know, people, Ayman, he went one day there without his higher self, and he ended up having a massive Kundalini experience, and his third eye literally had a burn on it when he came out of meditation. Like he hit his Kundalini so fast that the fire went up, and a scar came off here.
That's interesting.
You know, and
That's fascinating.
so it's real.
Yeah.
You know, those energies are very, very real, and it's like putting a finger in a socket.
Yeah.
It's too much.
Yeah.
It just fries us.
I've had similar experiences out of the palms of my hands. It's been very intense at times when it's an interesting clue. So can you go deeper into the dynamic with the higher self? Because that's really the pinnacle around which all of this pivots. Like there's really, if there's a point, if there's a theme, it's really about connection and strengthening with the higher self. So can you speak more about that?
So true. Yeah, so we, like at the beginning of our emotional alchemy course, for instance, that's the first thing we introduce people to. Obviously, a lot of people have already, you know, met their higher selves and worked with their higher selves, some people for years. But we really encourage people to personify them.
Okay.
Because we're used to, in our culture, we're used to communicating with humans. Some of us have started communicating with animals and trees, but in general, we communicate with other humans.
Yeah.
And so that's a very real interaction and feedback for us. So when obviously they don't have a human form, but when we give them body, when we give them a human form, then when we imagine them in our meditation, it makes them far more real to us. So we give them form, and we ask them for their name, you know. And these are things people always get a bit stressed about it, 'cause it's like, oh, I don't know if I've got it right. You can't really get it wrong. Because you're giving yourself an icon and an earcon to be able to bring them closer to you quicker. So I can close my eyes, or not even close my eyes. I can be in a difficult situation and say her name in my head, you know, and it'll bring her energy closer to me and make it more real to me, the human. You know, she's already there. But like, for me to feel her, you know, just the same as if I was in trouble and you were near me and I called your name, you know. So it's just a way of creating more intimacy. And obviously, anytime we have more intimacy, then we can build more trust. And over years, I mean, I first met my higher self and personified her, I think I was probably 20. And so I have this really long relationship with my higher self. And, you know, she's often the first person that I will talk to if I'm in trouble or if I can't work something out. Or, I mean, I talk to her pretty much every day,
Yeah.
at some level, you know. And that's an amazing thing, because I think for so many of us, we're looking for the love somewhere outside of ourselves. And this is, a lot of our relationship issues
Right.
and all of these
Right.
things that we
Right.
have
Right.
as humanity come from this searching and this seeking for love, which actually is all around us and in us, 24/7. If we have this relationship with us, the more, our higher self, our guides, our soul, our spirit, they're all aspects of self that are very real. So it's a beautiful journey, and it helps filter everything else we come across. So, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about tools in this podcast. But all of those tools, you always want to filter them through your higher self, because
Right.
you're an individual. You have your own DNA, your own ancestral blueprint, your own past life stuff that you've come to work out, your own future life stuff that you're living into. And there's just, any system that exists is going to have holes in it for you.
Yeah.
Because of your particular, the mother you had, the brother you had, whatever it is, we're all totally unique. So it's so important that any other teaching or teacher or system that we come across, that we have something to filter it through that is more than just us.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
developing, I mean, I have a team that I work with, my unseen team, which is my higher self. I have my male and female counselor. Now I have Ayman, he's of course amazing, added to my team, and a bunch of other people that I work with. But those are kind of my super core team, and everything else I study gets filtered through those guys that I have developed intimacy with.
Yeah.
And they have ways of talking to me that are specific. Some people obviously hear and see more vividly, or hear more vividly in meditation. Some people it's touch. But you're, over time of intimacy, you develop the ways that they talk to you. One of my ways, when I get a little stuck and I'm like, my self-doubt's coming in and I can't really get the message in meditation, they'll talk to me through song lyrics.
Yeah.
And it'll just come on the radio or pop into my head, and it'll be the exact one-liner that I needed to hear. I'll never forget the one in the middle of the night I got woken up with, "You are an obsession," stuck on my mind. And Ayman and I were in the middle of a huge argument about whether or not to have a dog. And I had the dog in my room, and I realized I'd gotten obsessed, and I had to just drop it. It wasn't time for a dog.
Right.
But the way she let me know that was just, she put that lyric in and woke me up with it.
Interesting.
And it was like, okay,
That's cool.
No more discussion. There was a very clear. So it's lovely as you develop that intimacy to have those clear knowings. And there's always going to be those moments of angst, because you're thinking through things. It's not like you're not going to get depressed and you're not going to have difficulties. Of course you are, because that's part of our composting and decision-making process. But then when those clear signs come through and you have that intimacy of knowing that's the way that they talk to you, you can just take it and be like, right, there doesn't need to be any more discussion.
Right.
Yeah,
and there's an aspect of the way you operate that I think he's Australian, Robert Moss. He's a shamanic teacher, and he does a lot of dream work, and he calls it chiromancy, where you're essentially, you're kind of doing a tarot spread with your whole world. Your whole reality is always bringing you some sort of clue or some sort of reading from your higher self, or part of your pantheon of helpers that are there to support you. That's really cool.
Yeah, and once you get into that expectation with them, like you said, you can ask a question, and you might not. Occasionally I hear the answer in meditation very directly, but most of the time I don't. But a newspaper will come and the headline will be that, or a song, or a friend, or they'll bring me the answer in 24 hours. Pretty much. And if they don't, I'm not ready to hear it usually,
Hmm.
because I haven't thought into it enough. I
Yeah.
haven't done my work around it enough. Like, they're not here to do it for me.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah,
but
I really like
yeah,
that process around the inner personifications and working with these energies. It feels uh, like you've customized what is practiced in really rigorous forms in like certain angel magic or shamanic animal powers, where you're working with the mechanisms of imagination and non-ordinary states to hypnotize and program yourself to greater levels of inner illumination and awareness, because you're able to draw on all
yeah,
these deeper aspects of reality to inform your practical life. Like, it's making real world impacts. It's fascinating. So meditation's really core. It connects us to the higher self. If we're not running everything through our higher self, our connection to the divine, it's really kind of pointless. But then there's this array of tools within the tool belt of the merchant priesthood, and gene keys is one that we had discussed, and was really, I would like to, I know you've worked with it a lot. I've worked with it moderately, but it's been incredibly helpful for me. I've worked with
yeah.
human design to a certain extent under that, but you've worked with gene keys. You've also worked with Enneagram. But why don't we dive a little bit into gene keys and really kind of have you just open riff on
Yeah.
on your experience with it and how it's useful for you.
Well, human design and gene keys are kind of connected, and I always like to refer to them as the most modern branch of astrology.
Hmm.
They're basically your astrology, your chart.
Yeah.
But what Richard has done is, I mean, he was a human design reader for many, many years, and that's how the gene keys came to him. As he saw these patterns of how these gates worked, and they came in as the 64 I Ching hexagram keys that humanity kind of lives through. These kind of personality traits, or not even traits, but it's like the
Hmm.
gifts. Yeah, as he calls them, the
Yeah.
gifts that each of these different energies bring. And what I love about the gene keys, I mean, obviously the gene keys weren't even around when I was younger. So by the time um, I met Richard, and he gave me the book and he did my keys, and I knew a lot about myself already, and I kind of didn't look at it for years, and he'd kind of prompt me every now and again, and then he was like, you just need to have a look into the back end of the website and check it out. And I started doing his courses,
Mm.
and I was like, whoa,
Mm.
because it wasn't it was everything I'd spent 20 years understanding about
Right.
myself, put into very concise little kind of bite-sized things. And I was
Right.
like, wow, if I hadn't have done 20 years, this would be I would be a revelation.
Yeah.
And it's a revelation.
Hmm.
And even with the 20 years, still the way that he puts it is so poetic and beautiful and heartfelt. And
Hmm.
he's just it's very gentle. Like, the shadow is right there and you have to look at it, but it's like fine
Right.
somehow, just in the way that he gifts the information.
Yeah.
um but what's amazing about the gene keys in relation to sacred commerce is that there's this whole pearl sequence, which is really you in business.
Hmm.
And it's the third of the sequences that he takes people through, because first is your activation sequence, which is kind of your container in this lifetime,
Hmm.
your life's work, your purpose, what people feel from you. And then there's the whole relationship sequence, the Venus sequence. And then there's the pearl, which is just four keys,
Right.
and it really I was actually studying it over the months leading up to Ayman's departure, which in a lot of ways I felt was almost preparing me for knowing how I was supposed to step forward with all of
Mm.
this when
Yeah,
without him as my
spontaneously within you,
guide.
you just kind of, oh, for
Yeah.
some reason you got interested in it, but
Well, Richard was running one of his live courses. They do live guided
hmm.
guided, so it's still an online training, but they kind of have group meetings along the way. So it was one of the big group meetings, and there was like, I don't know, 1,700 of us doing it, I think. And your core, which is also your vocation, is really the way in which you do your life's work. And it's not, I mean, the gene key of that sphere is really important, but even more important is the 6 lines, because that's how you express that key. So whatever that key might be, if you're a line 6, you're going to express it philanthropically. If you're a line 1, you're going to be there producing it and doing the blueprints and so they're very, and he relates them very much to the kind of business world expressions of that, like the marketing person, the director, the salesperson, so it's like really see that.
So you can essentially know which part, like it's not necessarily limiting, it's giving you a mirror so that you know how best to focus your energy to best be who you really are supposed to be, right?
It's the natural expression of your energy. It's like your natural, it's your grace. It's your God-given talent in that arena of your vocation, of your life's work. And so I was, living into this, and as I'm a line 4, which is by nature the director role, or the kind of salesperson, heart-based. They really connect to people. They love people. They understand what everyone's roles are, and they can kind of see the overview and kind of keep tabs on everybody. And I was just in this real review process of our whole business. My 95% of my business life is with my husband, is with Ayman. And so I was in this real review process of where I had really succeeded and shone, and where it had worked for me. And I could see, we did a lot together, as we did expos, we did festivals, we did books, we did films, we did photo shoots. We did a lot of creative endeavors in the 30 years that we had
most
together.
of it been done before I even showed up. Like I was pretty like right there at the tail end of it. But I got to kind of be there as you were, to kind of see, there was a very deep history in the space, the brands that were, when I was just getting in the space, like whole life, these were brands that were part of the emergence of consciousness through the 90s and the aughts, so it's a pretty phenomenal.
They were foundational brands for what is now the conscious revolution. So I was able to just kind of review all our business history, and really look at where I had thrived and where I had allowed myself to play that role of the director, because the director requires a certain amount of self-given authority to play that role, because you're basically, and it's like I could feel how it was always in me to just be that person. But Ayman was my elder. He was a man. We live in chauvinistic culture, so there was a lot that I had to break through in me to allow myself to play that role, even though I could feel like it was always my instinctual role to play. Like I was always telling everybody what to do, and he'd be like, and it was great, because as I reviewed it, I could see that where I had given myself permission to play that properly, kind of as almost, if you like, as a title, everything had gone really swimmingly, because I took responsibility at that level of the director, which is responsible kind of for the whole thing. They're responsible that the janitor does their job, and that the producer does their job, and everybody in between. And I could see where in our company, in Atopia and Sacred Commerce, it was important for me to step up to a new level. I didn't know it was because Ayman was about to leave, but I could feel that for our company, it was time for me to step into that role. And it was quite uncomfortable thought, still is slightly. And then Ayman was a line 6, which is, the line 6 is kind of, there's a level of completion to the line 6s. Wherever you have a 6 in your chart, you're kind of in that higher echelon of that energy, of that key. And it's, known as the philanthropist in that space. Obviously, in
Right.
different spaces, it's different things, but in that space, it's the philanthropist. And well, as you know, that's who he
Yeah.
was. He didn't think about where he any of his investments were going to come back. He made them because it was the right thing to do
Right.
for humanity's
Yeah.
evolution.
Yeah.
That was his total, like, I mean, when he, he went through pretty hard times in his mid 30s, and that's what brought him to his spirituality, and he had to heal himself
Hmm.
of many things. And when he did it in an incredibly short period of time because of his, information that he received about his inner emotional issues,
Yeah.
particularly with anger, and he managed to heal himself miraculously of what had been considered, terminal diseases.
I can't
And he
imagine
was like,
Ayman as an angry man.
everything. I
Just,
know. Well, he wasn't. He stuffed it all. It turned up as cancer of the pancreas.
oh,
That's what happens
yeah.
if you don't know you're an angry man.
Mm,
Yeah, because of course, all humans are angry about things that are not okay
yeah.
with them.
Yeah.
So if you're not an angry man, then you've stuffed it somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just bottom line.
Yeah.
So he was like, "Oh my God, why the hell wasn't I taught this? Like,
Mm,
I thought I was a super educated from a great family, like kind of top of the food chain situation,
mm,
of an upbringing and all the rest of it." And he didn't know about himself.
yeah.
And he was like, this is, he always liked to say, no child should be left behind in the realm of know thyself,
Mm,
and so he just poured money into creating the emotional literacy
mm,
program and all the films that we did and
yeah.
all the TV shows that we did. And then after that was kind of out of his system, he poured it into the business sector
Mm,
and wrote Executive EQ. And, but it was always just so without any thought of how any of it would come back. And in
right.
his interactions with all of his friends, his generosity. I mean, it's what people talk about the most. He was just this generous being. And when I realized that's that line 6, that's his vocation. He was one of the few people that I ever met that gave genuinely. He
Mm-hmm.
never expected anything in return. And it took him years to teach me how to do that, because as a twos can really give to get,
Right. Right.
it's not gentle when we're on our downside.
Right.
We're giving to you because you're going to look after us when we need it,
Right. Right.
and
Right.
you're going
Right.
to do this for
I'm
us, and
gonna
you
do
know
you a
us, and
favor
we have
now.
all, yeah, we have all these hidden
Yeah.
expectations. And he really taught me how to genuinely give.
Mm,
And it's one of the many many amazing gifts he gave me.
yeah.
um but what I did with the gene keys that was interesting while I was studying this was I have, like, I don't know, 50 or 100 charts of all my friends and family and colleagues on my computer. And I did a test, and I just went through, and before I opened each chart I would guess what line they were, to see that how obvious that vocation piece
Right.
is in people that
Yeah.
and I have good sight, if whatever you want to call
Yeah.
that kind of, anyway, so I see people pretty clearly. But I did this test and I got it, I don't know, between 80 and 90% right.
Wow.
Sometimes I'd have two guesses. I'd be like, either there are 3 or a
Mm-hmm.
5, or
Right.
so
That's
it
fascinating.
really made me trust the gene keys even more, in terms of when I look to work with
Mm-hmm.
people and collaborate with people. It's one of the things I check. I check their line, I check their Enneagram, just because it gives me so much data about how they can thrive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And obviously if you're working with someone and you want to create success with them, you need to put them in a situation where they're going to
Yeah.
thrive.
Yeah.
You
In
know, they're going to
businesses,
do the best work for you. We're going to do the best work for them.
yeah, businesses are going to operate better if everyone is really kind of working within what's the most ideal situation for them. Not necessarily what they've been prescribed to do, whether they fit it or not, but that they are the best fit for that particular type of a role. Yeah, that's really
Exactly.
important. Really important. So
So yeah, that's a really useful tool.
cool, cool. So that is a an aspect. You said it's the most modern. Would you say the
the most modern branch of
Modern
astrology. So
branch
it's
of
the same data that you would get from an astrologer,
yeah.
but it's put in a way that you can read it as an individual. Like when you get your astrology chart, you need an expert to read it for
Yeah.
you.
No, I don't.
But when you get the gene keys, you can actually just self-study it. You
Right.
actually don't need, I mean, it can be nice to have a reflection from someone that's worked with them for a long time, but you can get a ton without
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Just from the books and the audios.
Yeah, I agree. I've the the activation sequences are a particularly interesting innovation in how that works with the three different activation systems. But when you go underneath it, why do you think astrology works? I know that there's a people are very torn, and it seems like people who think that they're really rational and logical and they just look at the premise of, oh, I just put in the birth info and then this stuff comes out. Now, I have a feeling that most of the listeners of this program aren't necessarily hanging rigorously to that type of structure and approach, but it still begs the question, like, why, because you're a very rational person, you don't make decisions based on things that you don't necessarily understand. So why for you do you think astrology does work, and what do you think makes it so uncannily accurate based just off of birth information?
Such a great question and such a great mystery. And I don't know if we're ever going to have a real answer to that. But I think for me, how I see it is it's energetic imprints, and those energetic imprints, how they hit us at that moment are what create those things. And that's why we can read it, because those energetic imprints that the planets
Right.
send, if you like, or whatever, like the resonance of those planets as they move
Right.
is a certain resonance at your birth time that imprints your being, as you emerge into the world. So it's an energetic imprint.
Yeah.
And I think more and more as we come into this age of consciousness that we are hitting fast here as humanity, it will have less and less influence, and you will be able to manifest beyond your
Type.
imprinted energy or your astrological energy, and all systems, Enneagram gene keys are built to be trashed in the end, because they're only here to get us to a level of understanding where we can transcend them. Systems are always supposed to be transcended, because they're always going to be limited by nature of the fact that they're a system.
Right.
So it's not about getting too stuck on any of those things. And certainly, towards the end of Ayman and I's physical life together, we counseled each other regularly to stop blaming the Enneagram, or stop, because you can get to this, like, oh, Mercury was going backwards, and so it was Mercury, and it's like, no, you forgot to pay the bill. You know what I mean? Like, there's this kind of level of, like, it becomes the next thing to blame. And it's like, because I'm a 2, I martyred myself, and it's like, no, you martyred yourself.
Yeah. Well,
so
Russ.
They're
Go ahead.
great kind of. Yeah, I was just going to say they're great foundations for understanding, and then you're going to want to, throw them away, because you want to live into consciousness. This ultimately, the tool is awareness, and that's what comes from meditation, contemplation. Really sitting with and recognizing and choosing based on those recognitions. That's that's our big tools.
Yeah,
and these other ones can just help point to what to notice.
There's a whole expression of a person that's expressed through all of the archetypes in all the astrologies and divination sequences. And this is a good segue into the Enneagram, because one of the Enneagram teacher, Russ Hudson, I once heard him speak to the idea that you don't want to be limited by your type. You use your type as a kind of doorway to access your wholeness, because it's the most like you in where you are at the beginning of the arc of transformation. So that, if you engage with the Enneagram, it's not about constricting yourself into that type, but using it as a portal to the rest of you. And
100%.
and it's not
100%.
astrology based, is it? So, like, what's your experience with the Enneagram?
So two things. I just want to respond to that. I actually go, I don't call it a type. I call it your engine. So when you find out what your drive, you know, it's your drive. It's what gets you out of bed in the morning. It's what starts your engine. And then the whole point of the Enneagram is to then go round the map of every single one of the 9 points. So as you become more and more enlightened, you're constantly doing this map. So like, let's say I'm a 2, I integrate to the 4, a 4 integrates to the 1, which integrates to the 7, which integrates to the 5, which integrates to the 8, which takes me back to the 2 at a higher level. And I understand more of myself.
That's what all those lines are. That's what all those lines are. It's not just a cool design.
It's not just a cool design. And actually, how you're really, you know, is how it's built to be viewed is from above, and it's a spiral. So every time you come back to yourself, you're coming back to yourself at a higher level of understanding and awareness. And so the Enneagram is all about, in a way, transcending your drive. Not that you're ever going to transcend it, because anytime a stress happens, which is you're hungry, you're thirsty, someone dies, you know, like any shock to our system or any stress, which happens every day, you know, there's something that stresses us, takes us into our negative patterns, right? And that's the beauty of knowing your Enneagram drive, is you can see when you're up against the wall, oh my God, I'm, you know, I'm martyring myself, I'm being a bitch, I'm, you know, I'm acting out basically because I'm under stress. And you can have some compassion and you can point yourself back to your North Star, which is your integration. So it's this beautiful map to enlightenment. And, you know, in all of Ayman and I's interactions, business interactions especially, we've always encouraged everybody we've worked with to take the Enneagram because it gives you a map of your emotional matrix in this lifetime. And when you can really go straight to those things that are hard for you, your bugaboo, if you like, your poison, your hard emotions, then you can unplug the situation much quicker. So it's not like, you know, they're always going to happen. Shit happens.
And
you know,
it's not astrology based, it's questionnaire based, right?
It's questionnaire based, and it comes out of, so I mean, we can get esoteric and we can say, you know, it's a choice that you and your higher self and your soul make before this lifetime. That is truth, obviously, to that. And you can also say it comes in response to the family dynamic that you are born into. So as this little being, you know, in order for me to get love in this family, then I'm going to need to be smarter than everyone else and be a brainiac. I'm going to need to just love everybody else and serve them. I'm going to need to keep the peace with everybody. I'm going to need to take charge because nobody else knows what they're doing. I'm going to need to, you know, these personalities come about as a coping mechanism in your family as a child. And that's why those disintegration things, what we refer to as the poison in the Enneagram, which it kind of becomes the fluid that you live in by the time you hit your 20s, and so you don't really see it. That's why it's called a poison, because it's insidious. You're there and it's the water you're swimming in, right? And until you get really conscious about the truth of who you are and your shadow, you can't really see that poison because it's just everywhere. You're riddled with it. And that's a key. Usually when someone really hits their Enneagram drive, it's like the last one they would want to be, because you feel it. You're like, oh my God, but it takes a minute because it's the water, it's the air you breathe.
I'm curious about like if one is questionnaire based, other is astrology based. Do you essentially end up looking at a similar profile of yourself though when you hold the two up? Are they essentially saying similar things about you?
I would say you don't. No, I mean, yes and no, both and. But I think the Enneagram much more shows you your emotional matrix and your kind of your coping mechanism, and it gets very tempered by your astrological energies. So, for instance, I don't know if I should tell everyone in the world that I'm a 2, but I'm a 2, which is the people that,
It's a
want to
good problem to
be in
have
love
if everyone in the world is listening to our podcast and finds out you're a 2.
with.
So it's a good
Okay.
trade-off.
All right, we'll go with it. So they're the love and service people,
Yeah.
right? And that's their kind of drive. And on their shallow side,
Okay.
on their negative side, they can be quite shallow because they're giving to get, right?
Okay.
So there's this kind of like manipulative side to them.
There's silent
But
contracts.
yeah, but on the kind of face of it, they can be like very sweet and
Mm-hmm.
good and nice and love everybody and care for everybody. But then I'm a Scorpio,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Okay.
And the Scorpios are a little tougher, and they're a little, more, know what they want. And that, so there's this edge to my 2 that other 2s don't have,
Right.
because maybe they're a 2 and they're a Cancer, which is like being a double 2,
Got it.
because Cancer is very like a 2. Whereas Scorpio is more like an 8,
Mhm.
which is my disintegration on the Enneagram. So I have to be careful.
Yeah.
But it really, I feel like they work together and they flavor each other.
Yeah.
And, so there's a million different 2s. What you have in common is that your poison is your pride.
Mm-hmm.
Where you trip up is martyring yourself. These are the things, but how I express those things, there's a million different colors of it. But the actual core issue is the same through all 2s. But it will be literally just expressed in a million different colors.
So there's real opportunity to be working with both at the same time. And even probably human design at the same time. I know that there's things that it addresses probably better than Gene Keys. I know that it deals a lot with strategies, like there's.
What I love about the human design is how it kind of shows you how your electrical circuitry works with other people's electricals. I think it showed me, like, we are electrical beings.
Yeah.
And we kind of have maybe heard that in quantum physics or something. But when you see those grids and then you see the body graphs of a human design map, and you see them put on top of each other, like you put mine and Ayman's body graph on top of each other, and all of a sudden we hook up each other's pathways, and like a gazillion more things is possible than me on my own or him on his own.
Yeah, I find that really fascinating too.
And that happens with all people. So I've done it like for our whole company when we've worked, when we've had a bigger team.
Yes.
I've like,
the connection chart, right? Yeah, it's called the connection chart.
The connection chart, and like people's roles, like where where people are gonna, we should let people just really shine, because it's like they are literally hooked up to play that piece.
So as an organizational leader, it really behooves you to, if your job is to build teams, which is what leaders are. I mean, they have to know the details of the product, but they also have to have this whole skill set, this whole imperative around building the right team, and being able to work this at an organizational level feels really important.
I think it can be. I mean, I've only played with it a little bit. I think, like all those, especially astrology, it's such a vast subject that I think we probably have only seen the tip of the iceberg of what really is there. Even the best astrologers, it's like we know more and more and more as humanity is becoming more conscious. We're able to read much further into it. So I think potentially one of the dangers with us and astrology and and human design and stuff is that we put a little too much weight on these things. But so I use them lightly, I would say. I use them as kind of little, like, winks from the universe of like how things, but then obviously I'm much more work with what's in front of me as well.
Sure. And I always run it by my own personal self-assessment. But what I find is uncanny is like, wow, this feels really accurate about me. And I find that when I apply some of the different prescriptions that are intended to help me in my actual life, that they help me, like Like,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know, one of the biggest insights from human design was realizing I'm not a manifester type. So if I try to act like a manifester, it's just going to make the whole situation awkward. But if I'm more in this other
Right.
position, which is much more like wait for the world to come to me and respond to it, then, and when I've looked on my history and reviewed and thought about what have been the most beneficial dynamics, it's always been that, not where I kicked down the door. And I've always been responding to something and that's what made it appropriate. Uh,
Yeah.
there's there's also this piece of you know, there's a lot of other kind of like tools, you know, because the broader context for this conversation on gene keys and human design is that these are tools that is appropriate if you want to be following the path of sacred commerce, if you are identifying with being in this kind of collective called the merchant priesthood, past and present and future. There's these tools we can use, and they
They're tools that can help you accelerate your awakening,
exactly,
you know, just by really pointing you to kind of key
yeah,
issues. And if you're at all awake, as you're saying, you recognize them, but there's something about recognizing them with that
mm-hmm,
clarity of like, wow, I'm literally was born into this
right,
energy. Like this imprint is really real. Came with me as I arrived. You know, there's something about kind of the realness of owning that kind of makes dealing with it slightly
yeah,
different,
yeah, yeah.
you know?
So let's talk about embodiment practices that, you know, to kind of like really, you know, this is all pretty heady stuff. It's a lot of thinking, it's a lot of
Yeah.
meditating, contemplating, and, you know, but the body, I heard once, is the greatest source of wisdom next to your soul, next to your higher self. And it's really a bridge. So when we're talking about embodiment, it's not just this thing, you know, you address your body so that your brain can keep thinking. It's really a bridge, it's a conduit through which the most important information is entering into your field. So can you speak a bit to embodiment? Thank you.
So beautifully said. So beautifully said already. But yes, definitely. Like, I mean, I've always kind
Hmm.
of yoga and walking and dance have been my main embodiments. But I will say that anytime I'm super stuck on something, like, you know, living into a shadow aspect or trying to understand something where I'm just blocked and I don't
Hmm.
understand, I'll almost always just get out and go for a big long walk. And it's a combination of getting into the body and everything that you've been studying and thinking about this problem or this issue or this
Right.
shadow or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah.
It just starts
I
filtering
got that
through,
image
right?
at the same time.
It's like the sifting process starts happening and it goes from like this, oh my God, what am I gonna do? To like, whoo, whoo. And almost always by the end of the
Mm,
walk, I'll have the first step of what to do. I'll have just dropped in. And it's from none of the thinking. It's
yeah.
all just filtered down and it's just like one little action thing,
Hmm.
which sometimes is to do nothing, you know, just put it on a side for a while, you know. But there'll be a clarity, and very often that clarity does not come until I've done that, you know. So yeah, so important to balance all this intellectual understanding with letting it land in the body. And as
Manifesting
you say, the
generator.
wisdom of the body. I mean, for a lot of us, are you a generator? Manifesting generator, same as me. Um, yeah, for a lot of us, that kind of
Hmm.
gut response, for you and I especially, is so key. For the manifesting generators, you know, your gut response is how you know whether to take something on or not. And what's dangerous in our Western world is we're so conditioned to stay in our minds that we can miss the gut response, and then we get like,
Right.
can take us two
Right.
weeks to make a
Right.
decision that actually we knew about the second we were asked it, but we missed it, you know. And
Oh,
I'll
that's a good
often do
trick.
something
Huh.
crazy like flip a coin and see then how my
Yeah.
gut reacts to the answer. And I don't necessarily do what the coin says, but I'll be like,
Right.
heads yes, tails no. It'll
Right.
flip, and my gut will then respond to it,
Right.
and then I'll get back in
Yeah,
touch
you're
with my gut
listening. What did
response.
I want it to
So it's
say?
not like
And
I'm
then
gonna
that's the
do
one
what
you
it
do.
says,
Yeah.
but like, just yeah,
Right,
exactly,
right. And if
exactly. But I have to put myself in the like, okay, this is gonna be heads or tails, and I'm gonna
right.
act on it,
Yeah,
and
that's
then
good.
it's like, oh no, actually, I don't want to act on that, no, and yeah. So
Hmm.
yeah, or you can just get someone to ask you the question again, like phone a friend, like,
Yeah,
okay, ask me these three questions, and like, because you have to get back into your gut.
that's good.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm definitely someone that lives
Hmm.
by that a lot, and it's more important for some people than others. Depends how you're wired. I mean, as you well know, Ayman had a very particular
Hmm.
relationship with his body, but his whole matrix was to think through it and emotionally
Yeah,
respond and
I
find
would say
the
he's
answer through his
embodied.
through
I
his
wouldn't
emotional
apply the
response to
same.
something.
So
So he had to really think about it. He
there's like a whole like I don't know, it's a popular ideal around what embodiment looks like, and it has a very fitness, health twist on it. But the
yeah,
point isn't about like, how many smoothies do you drink, or how much yoga do you do, or can you get into a full lotus as opposed to a half lotus. These are kind of like they're good markers in some cases, but the whole point isn't really about like that you hit those markers before you can achieve awareness or enlightenment or awakening.
right.
They're clues along the way, and I would say that Iman would have been embodied. It was just not an atypical. It was an atypical expression of embodiment, so that you could make
Absolutely. He was
judgments.
embodied he was embodied as a merchant
Yeah,
priest. He had the like the big belly to hold all the information and digest
right.
everything, and like it would just flow through
Yeah,
him. No, I mean he was so super clear, but his strategy was for something to happen and to sit on
yeah,
it, think about it, feel his emotions around it, and then
right.
respond. So he'd always be like, I'll tell you tomorrow.
Yeah,
And people would get really, in our company, he would quite often kind of be like, no, like as a first response, as the kind of leader of the company. But the next day he'd come back in and he'd be like, yeah, that was a good idea.
right, right.
But it's because it had to filter
Yeah,
through him, you
yeah,
know? And so I would always tell people like, don't be scared of arguing with Iman, because if your argument's good, you'll know
right.
about it the next day.
Yeah.
He will respond to he
Reason.
responded to greatness, to great
Yeah.
ideas, to reason, you know, to what was right. But he had a filter system for that, whereas me, it's a gut response. You know,
Well,
and probably you're the
let's
same.
talk about some variety of divination systems that exist. There's tarot, runes. You said you have a really sweet rune story. Runes have been really helpful for me.
I
I
do.
think it has there's a genetic aspect to runes, I think, that works for me when I'm thinking about what's ancestrally really appropriate for um and I have a bit of a primitive dynamic, a kind of semi-feral uh personality and beingness that runes are. There's something about that works for me. But yeah, tell us about your rune story and divination in general, tarot, all that.
Yeah, I would love to. It's such a beautiful story. So, um, when Iman and I met, there was this kind of crazy chemistry from the day we met, and we kept on meeting at different meetings, like for over various months, like every month or two, would meet somewhere. Once in London, once at his house, once in California. So it was like different setups.
Mm.
And then we spent this whole weekend, me, him, and Christopher, up at Christopher's house in Boulder Creek, up in the woods, and we had this magical weekend, just absolutely magical, and very enlightening. Like there was a real synergy. Obviously, the three of us had many, many past lives together, and it was
Mm.
on a soul level. We were just so delighted to all be in situ, and think I've mentioned before, we were the 20/40/60 club at that time,
Yeah,
and it was just the
talk
three
more
of us.
about Christopher real quick, just to like give some context of who he
So
is before you continue your
absolutely,
story.
Christopher Hills had a company called University of the Tree, the publishing company, and he has, I think, around 20 books on consciousness, dowsing, evolution. He was one of the early thought leaders in what was then the New Age. So this is like back in the
And a
70s,
businessman.
80s. And a businessman, and the scientist behind spirulina as a superfood, which came out of a promise he made to God to find a solution to world hunger that, you know, could be grown anywhere easily, cheaply, and bring you all the nutrition you needed. So he was he was the most conscious being I've met in a human body, hands down. Like, his consciousness was epic, just vast and brilliant. And yeah, Ayman, he saw out Ayman a couple of years before I met them both because of Ayman's music. And he felt all the energetic imprints in Ayman's music and wanted to know who this was. And it was wonderful listening to Ayman's music with him, because he would always talk you through what it was doing energetically in your body and your auric field.
Neat.
He had this, I wish I'd recorded it. He had this beautiful, like, and now he comes up to the heart and he opens the heart. And, like, you know, he had this whole, like, dialogue of what the music was actually doing energetically. So he was a supreme being. And we had this super magical weekend together up at his house on the mountains. And various light force people came in and out. That was the company that sold spirulina that him and Ayman co-owned, that he founded and Ayman bought into later. And at the end of the weekend, Christopher and I both kind of came up into the lounge early one morning at the same time, and he was like, let's take rune cards. And so we both took a rune card, and I got the breakthrough. And, you know, basically the card says you have made a 180-degree turn. Your life will never be the same again. You will never go back to your old life. And I stood there. I can remember exactly where I was standing. You know, I can remember everything. Like, it was one of those, like, moments when, and I knew I would never go back to my old life. I didn't know I was going to marry Ayman at that point, but I knew I would never go back to my old life, and that my consciousness had done a quantum leap. And Ayman drove me back later that day, and I was staying in a friend's camouflage caravan in Bolinas, like, just meditating. I was on this kind of little spiritual quest while I waited for my company contract to get finished, because I was also importing blue-green algae to England, which is how I met them. I was their competitor.
Yeah, that's how y'all met. You guys were competitors, right?
That's how we all met. Yeah. And he walked into my he walked into my caravan, and I had the rune cards and the rune stones, and he was like, oh, let's pick a card for me and you. And I was like, sure, go ahead. She shuffled the card, picked a card, partnership. And he was like, oh, let's take a stone too. Shook the bag, picked the stone, partnership. It was just like, we looked at each other, we're like, what the hell does that mean? Like, we were still in the kind of like, you're too short, too old, too young, too, you know, we were in the, like, judgment phase of, like, getting to know each other in terms of whether it would whether it would ever be a relationship, and what kind of relationship, like, because even as a business partner, like, you know, you're too young, too, like, all the too much, you know, all the judgments were up. But we just knew there was this amazing connection, and for both of us, that was actually such a kind of cosmic confirmation of where we should go as a duo, as a team, and was, you know.
Generally speaking, kind of, those are really good questions to have been asking. You know, I mean, they're you know, they're legitimate questions. You know, it's not like, you know, you shouldn't ask those questions, but to have that.
No, it's a great question. What do we do with this connection? And it wasn't like what kind of partnership, it was partnership, you know, just you guys should be working together. That's what you came here for, you know. And it was, so it was a great confirmation. And I will say, as I said with systems, that divination also is something that you need to, you know, I think it's good to dip in and out of. I think I definitely feel like there was a time when I couldn't make any decision without doing a divination or getting a reading or like, like, which ends up giving your power away.
Right.
And there was a very definite phase where I just stopped doing any kind of asking and got more into the body intelligence and like just feeling it through my body, like, okay, what wants to happen here? And I don't use divination that much in my life at this point in my life. But I do love it. And when there's something big, I'll often go to someone and kind of read with somebody,
Right. Right.
Yeah. But yeah, it's wonderful. And obviously the tarot is a even more beautiful map because it's connecting to the very real energy, which is the energy of the archetypes, which is one of the realms. I'm not great with numbers, but it's one of the realms, many realms up above us. There is a number where it is, at which are the realms that filter the energy of the universe into, our universe, where we can handle it. And if we were to go, put our fingers in the socket of the realm of the archetypes, it would fry us. And any time we work with the archetypes, even in divination, even in the tarot, we always want to have our higher selves with us, because that is a very, very, very real and those, energy. And those cards are a tiny reflection of something so vast. It's absolutely beyond our comprehension, which is why it's so amazing and so powerful to work with it in the safe way with guidance.
Yeah.
That's why that relationship with the higher self is so fundamental, because it's the filter through which you bring everything else. It's your litmus,
Yeah, and in an ideal world, these different tools of the merchant priesthood are really about, the tool is getting you to be able to connect and be in a seamless communication with your higher self. The goal isn't that you get better and better at understanding these tools. The goal is that you're in a communication with your soul where it is in you and it's calling the shots all the time. And when you look at all the religious traditions, they're all saying that about themselves, that it's about getting you to where you're, in Islam, it's the whole idea is you're submitting to the will of God. Now, they got a ton of rules about what that looks like, but ultimately when you clear away all the ethnic variations and distinctions and agendas between these different religious systems and different divination systems and whatnot, it's really about letting the soul come into full embodiment and work with the systems that exist. I mean, it's there for the big decisions. You have a lot of sub decisions that, it's not like you have to check in with your soul to decide if you want a cup of coffee or whatnot. But, you can really kind of overthink these things, but really it's like, how well is your life working? How well do you feel like you're moving through time and space in alignment with what your soul wants for you? And sometimes it looks and feels crunchy, and you could be in great alignment with your soul. It looks and feels crunchy in terms of life circumstances, and that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, beautifully said.
Well, do you think you have anything to add or share or tack on to this conversation, or do you feel complete with the tools?
That feels like a beautiful, beautiful ending. And I feel like just maybe saying a little shout out to the community about, joining us in this conversation.
Yeah, please
if
do.
They feel called.
Oh yeah, like they say in the other YouTube videos, if you've got tools you want to add, throw them in the comments. We have this on YouTube, but if you're listening on a podcast, then obviously you can't comment. But think about it. Contact us at sacredcommerce.com. Check out the YouTube video of this too, and throw your comment in there. They say I have a beard for radio.
Yes. This is a community. This is reaching out and to be a community meme, and we want to grow it with you.
Please contribute. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Rowan. Be well, everyone.
Thank you, Emmanuel.